So here is your review in preparation for the test. I would highly encourage you to do each problem, pause the video, do each problem, and then see what I say is the answer. I also don't have my stylus, so I'm writing with my finger. So bear with me. So the first one is just list the 5 properties of a parallelogram. So pause the video and try it. Okay, so I always like to have a picture. Number 1 is that opposite sides are parallel, and that looks like this. They put the arrows. Number 2 is that opposite sides are congruent. Number 3, opposite angles are congruent. Number 4, the angles next to each other, consecutive angles, so like angle A, B, C, and D. This is really bad. Angle A plus angle B equals 180. Consecutive angles are supplementary. And then finally, number 5 would be that the diagonals bisect each other. So those 2 parts are congruent. Those are your 5 properties of parallelogram. Okay. On this one, I'd like you to solve for x. Now, this one, you need to be careful. So in this problem, when you look at it, let me ask you, do you think it's a parallelogram? And then let me ask you, do you know if it's a parallelogram? And your answer might be, I think it's a parallelogram. And my question for you would be, why? How do you know it's a parallelogram? What information tells you it is? And there isn't any. There is nothing on this picture that tells us that opposite sides are congruent. Opposite angles are congruent. Diagonals are perpendicular. Opposite sides are parallel. There's no symbols here. You see, in order for that to be true, we would have needed to have symbols like this. But we don't. Those weren't there. So the only thing we can assume is that it's a quadrilateral. And so therefore, our opposite, all of our angles together have to equal 360. So 110 plus 3x minus 5 plus 4x minus 10. I really am bad at writing with my finger. 4x plus 10. All of this equals 360. So you should combine like terms and solve. So you're going to have 105, because I'm going to combine my 110, my minus 5, minus 10 plus 10 cancels out. 3x and 4x is 7, and 4 more is 11, equals 360, and then you'll solve. And your answer should be 23.2. That would be your answer. Now, let's suppose you were like, hey, I thought that it was a parallelogram, and you tried to say opposite angles were congruent. Well, if you set these two equal to each other, you're going to get a value for x. And then if you set these two values equal to each other, you'll get a value for x. And they're not the same. Because they're not the same, that would show you again that it's not a parallelogram. So be very careful about what you assume. So here, pause your video, try this one. And your answer should be no, it's not a parallelogram. Why? Because there's no information. Nowhere on here does it say any of our 5 properties. So this is not a parallelogram, even though it looks like one. You do not know that it is. Is this quadrilateral a parallelogram? Why? And again, your answer why is one of your 5 reasons. And your answer should be yes. And the reason that it meets is the fact that opposite angles are congruent. Okay? Opposite angles are congruent. Is this quadrilateral a parallelogram? Pause the video, try it. This is one where many people say yes, and they're wrong. The reason why is because, these two angles, they add up to be 180. But who knows what this angle is down here? What if this angle was 111? Or what if it was 109? We don't know what that measure is. What if this measure was 71? Maybe it was 75. We don't know these other measures. So these two angles, while they are they're supplementary, we don't have anything for these two angles or for those two. So we don't have anything about consecutive angles. We only have one set. So this is a no. So be very thoughtful about the rules. In order to say opposite or consecutive angles are congruent, you need 3 of the 4 angles. Okay, we only have 2. All right, so this was a Smart Notebook file, and so it looks a little goofy, but list each quadrilateral for which the statement is true. So here's our first statement. Adjacent angles are supplementary. So here's all your choices in the blue box. Which ones meet the adjacent angles are supplementary? Adjacent angles are supplementary means that the angles next to each other. Adjacent means next to. So angles that are next to each other, consecutive is another word for adjacent. So a parallelogram has consecutive angles congruent. If a parallelogram has it, so does a rectangle, so does a rhombus, and so does a square. All of those have consecutive angles are supplementary. Now, what about a trapezoid? A trapezoid, angle 1 and angle 2 are supplementary, but 1 and 3 are not. Okay, so that's why a trapezoid would not meet it. So a trapezoid doesn't work, isosceles doesn't work, and then a kite doesn't work. Okay, so adjacent angles, adjacent is another word for next to or consecutive. Next one. Again, list all the quadrilaterals and meet this condition. Adjacent angles are supplementary and congruent. So let me ask you this. If the adjacent angles are supplementary and congruent, that means the angles next to each other have to be equal. So they both have to be 90 degrees because supplementary means 180. And if they're equal, you got to divide it in half. So they both got to be 90. So they're all going to be 90 degrees. So now that would mean that it would be a rectangle or a square. Number 3, adjacent sides are perpendicular. Again, adjacent meaning next to. So in the past, I had noticed that kids didn't know what this word meant. And so really, when I made this video, I made a lot of the same words to try to drill it into their heads. So adjacent sides are perpendicular. Well, that's actually the same as the last one. If adjacent sides are perpendicular, that means they make right angles. So it is simply a square and a rectangle again. All right. Number 4, exactly one pair of opposite sides are parallel. So the word exactly is where we need to pay attention. Exactly one side of opposite sides are parallel. So a parallelogram doesn't fit it because it has both sides are parallel. So a parallelogram doesn't fit. So if a parallelogram doesn't fit, neither does a rhombus, a square, or a rectangle. But a trapezoid does fit. And if it's a trapezoid, an isosceles trapezoid also works. Find the value of x. And assume, here we go, I talk about not assuming. Assume this is a trapezoid. Well, we had the mid-segment theorem that said that the two bases added together, 8 plus 26, divided by 2 equals the mid-segment. So 8 plus 26 would be 34. 34 divided by 2 would be 17. Also remember, if this is 17, look at the distance between 8 and 17 and the distance between 17 and 26, and they're the same. How about this one? Find the value of x here. Now this one, don't let it confuse you. We just put algebra with it. So again, still, the two bases added together. So 2x minus 5 plus 4x plus 5 divided by 2 has to equal that middle segment of 24. So I still just wrote an equation. The plus 5 and minus 5 are going to cancel. That'll leave me with 6x divided by 2 equals 24, which this is 3x equals 24, and so x equals 8. And that's the end. All right, feel free to let me know what questions you have. Otherwise, you can watch this video again, go back and watch any of the other videos. There's a review in your textbook. You could do that to help prepare if you feel like you need some more problems.